The dinner that changed everything in Missoula. I still remember every detail, down to the way my father's steak knife gleamed in the overhead light, and how the air in our little Missoula house felt thick with something I couldn't yet name. We always had family dinners on Thursdays. Nothing fancy. Pot roast or meatloaf, my mother passing the mashed potatoes like some sacred ritual between her anxiety and my father's silent authority. Usually, I'd be chatting away, tossing out a story about a client at the design studio who wanted zebra print wallpaper for their entire living room. I mean, can you imagine? And my mother would laugh, always trying to keep the peace. But that night was different. My father seemed restless, tapping his fingers on the table, barely touching his food. My mother's hands shook as she poured iced tea, her eyes darting between us, but never quite meeting mine. I thought maybe I'd done something wrong, or maybe she was just worried about the bills stacking up in the kitchen drawer. Who wasn't anxious about money these days? In Missoula, just as I popped a green bean into my mouth, my father suddenly set his glass down. Not so much setting as slamming, really, making everyone jump. The sound was sharp, slicing through the background hum of the dishwasher. He didn't yell, but his voice was icy, all the more terrifying for how calm it sounded. "Jessica, you have 2 days to get your things out." It took me a second to realize he was speaking to me. I felt my fork pause midair. The whole room seemed to freeze. My younger brother, Brady, was barely ever home. He'd left for New York half a decade ago, chasing the kind of dream that always sounded a little too big for reality. But now, here was my dad, declaring the house belonged to him. I searched my mother's face for an answer, but she was focused on the plaid pattern of her napkin, folding and unfolding it in tight, nervous movements. The silence stretched on like an eternity. Brady wasn't anywhere in sight, but suddenly his shadow, the weight of his absence, was everywhere. I felt a heat rise in my chest, a wild mix of shock, humiliation, and a kind of grief you only feel when home is threatened. For years, I'd poured my heart, weekends, and every last penny, nearly $60 into keeping a roof over all our heads, the chipped countertops, the new shingles I saved for, the midnight painting projects. Apparently, none of that belonged to me now. My father leaned back, arms crossed as if the verdict had been settled weeks ago. "You always knew your brother would come back eventually. He needs this house more than you do." It hit me as I watched him close off, how their minds had already moved on. To them, I was temporary, a placeholder, until the son they boasted about at every barbecue finally decided to return. Every sacrifice I'd made was invisible. My mother opened her mouth, maybe to protest, maybe to offer some weak explanation, but no words came. Her blue eyes brimmed with guilt. The only sounds left were my heart pounding and the clatter of my fork as I laid it, carefully, beside my untouched plate. 1,000 arguments raced through my mind. All the bills in my name, the sweat, the years. I'd been the one holding us together, but I said nothing. Instead, I stood, pushing my chair back in the hush of the room. Words failed me, and honestly, I was afraid if I opened my mouth, it would all come out as a sob. Without a backward glance, I left, first the table, then the kitchen, then the memory of ever belonging in that room. Upstairs, as I shut my bedroom door, I realized something inside me had snapped, a bitter kind of clarity. They thought I would leave quietly, packed away like last season's clothes. If only they knew how wrong they were. That dinner in Missoula didn't just end a happy Thursday tradition. It tipped the scales of my whole life. And while nobody saw it then, not my father, not my fragile-voiced mother, I knew already that this night would change everything. The Invisible Caretaker's History. The morning after that explosive dinner, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, that same pale blue I'd painted with my own hands. The house was creaking with familiar morning sounds. The low hum of the heater, the soft scrape of Mom moving around the kitchen, the metallic clink of Dad's coffee spoon. It should have felt comforting, but instead, that comfort twisted into something sour, reminding me just how long I'd been the invisible caretaker in my own family's story. 3 years before, the Neal house was dangling by a thread. My parents, once so careful, were drowning in $60,000 of overdue loans, their eyes hollow from worry. I still remember the day the foreclosure notice came. The heavy envelope smacked on the counter in front of Dad. Mom's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Back then, I was just 27, juggling small interior design gigs, scraping together savings, dreaming of some urban apartment of my own someday. But in that moment, none of those dreams mattered. All I saw was my childhood home, where I first painted my own bedroom yellow, where Dad patched up my bike tires and Mom baked cinnamon rolls every Christmas, about to vanish. When they hit rock bottom, I was the one who stepped up. I drained my entire savings account, not because they begged. It was pride that kept them silent anyway, but because home was meant to be a place you can't lose. Every late night, picking up freelance work, skipping lattes, shelving my own ambitions, became a deposit back into our future. If it needed to be someone, it might as well be me. I drove straight to the local bank, sliding over checks with trembling hands to cover what Mom and Dad couldn't. The relief that flooded their faces when the mortgage got caught up, that, I thought, would be enough for a lifetime. But enough is a slippery thing in families. By the next summer, debts forgotten, my parents' conversations drifted farther from the work I did. No one mentioned the fresh coat of paint, the patched roof, the hours spent sanding floorboards. They'd brag to neighbors about my brother Colt's finance job in New York, his sharp suits, and brilliant mind for numbers. Never mind he hadn't called in ages, let alone offered help. I overheard Mom telling Doris from next door about Colt's latest incredible deal, while I scrubbed spaghetti sauce from the kitchen counters I'd replaced with my own money. What stung the most wasn't just this casual erasure. It was that, for them, care work was invisible unless it was coming from the prodigal son. Colt, whose smiles on weekend visits seemed to fill every room, was the Neal child who made it. Meanwhile, my contribution was as sturdy and silent as the walls around us. When something broke, Mom and Dad looked to me, dishwasher, porch light, leaky piping, then forgot, as soon as it was fixed, that the solution cost me more than just money. Still, I convinced myself none of it mattered. Families don't keep score, I'd mutter, while folding laundry or fixing another loose door hinge. Though, clearly, some people did. I was the one who signed checks, took out trash, and kept the lights burning during the bleakest winters. Colt's postcards from New York, all skyscrapers and shiny promises, landed in our mailbox like little reminders that I was still holding the fort. And even when Mom cried after a failed job interview, or Dad snapped under the weight of unpaid bills, it was always me they called. I'd cook comfort dinners, sneak grocery gift cards into their wallets, joke to lift the silence. I wanted to believe that being the responsible child would eventually mean being the cherished one. But some families hold tighter to fantasy than gratitude. That morning after the ultimatum, with the memory of Dad's cold words rattling in my chest, I saw it all for what it was. I was their safety net, their fallback plan, and, worst of all, the invisible caretaker, expected to keep the world spinning until the real child came home to claim the prize. I stared at my bedroom ceiling one last time, feeling both older and wiser. Loving a family doesn't mean giving until you disappear. The secret behind the asset statement. It was the afternoon after that disastrous family dinner when I finally realized there must be more to what had happened. For all the years I'd spent patching the plaster and budgeting grocery lists, my parents had always been guarded when it came to financial paperwork. But it wasn't until I called my best friend and longtime confidant, Lindsay Myers, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney with a knack for ferreting out trouble, that the cracks in their story started to show. Lindsay listened quietly as I poured out what had happened the night before. My dad's cold command for me to leave, the sudden transfer of the house to my brother Brady, my own unspoken grief.
Thank you.
She didn't interrupt, just waited until I finished. "Whitney, something's off," she said at last. "If they're shoving you out so quickly, check the house's financial documents. See if anything's changed in the last year." Her words echoed in my mind as I hung up and stared around my childhood bedroom. The pale blue walls now somehow closing in. My gut twisted with uncertainty, but I forced myself up and made my way into the cramped hall closet. Home to decades worth of tax returns, bank statements, and insurance policies. Dust motes danced in the sunlight as I rummaged through greasy folders and brittle envelopes. At first, I only found the usual stuff: electric bills, water statements, a half-finished Sudoku book from 2015. But then, my hand landed on a cream-colored folder, different from the rest. No label. I opened it and nearly dropped the contents. Inside was a copy of a home equity loan, $60,000 approved barely 6 months ago, bearing not just my name and social security number, but my signature as the primary borrower. The thing was, I'd never seen the document before, much less signed anything for a new loan. The signature was a near match, but the loops and angles felt off. The slant, just a little too sharp. My stomach dropped. I snapped photos of the paperwork and called Lindsay back, my hands shaking so much I nearly dropped the phone. Her reaction was instant. "Whitney, that's classic identity theft. They forged your signature. You need to check with the bank. See if the funds ever reached your parents or went to Brady." The next step was tracking down Finn Walsh, the branch manager at First Federal, who, thankfully, had once been a client in dire need of a waiting room redesign. He owed me a favor. I dialed his cell. "Finn, it's Whitney. I need a huge favor. I think I found evidence my family took out a loan in my name. Can you check if there's anything else tied to my social security number at your branch?" Finn called back in less than an hour. "Whitney, I'm sorry to say you're right. There's a $60,000 home equity loan signed 6 months ago. Your parents and your brother are co-borrowers, but you're listed as the primary. I remember the file now. Your signature was what pushed it through the approvals. It looked off, but, well, they brought all the right paperwork. Guess the bank didn't look hard enough." I felt the world drop out from under me. There it was, in black and white. My own family had faked my name to save Brady's ambitions. Lindsay's voice, when I called her, was steel. "This isn't just betrayal, Whitney. It's a federal crime. They didn't just take your money. They took your future. You need every single piece of evidence. Copy the loan documents, grab the account records, any emails you can find. If your parents or Brady even mention your name in reference to the loan, write it down. They have to be held accountable." I spent hours that night crawling through every inch of the house, digging through my mother's quilting basket, the bottom drawer of my father's desk, even the attic, with its chilly air and the scent of old cedar and family secrets. Eventually, I found another envelope, this one wedged behind a stack of broken holiday ornaments. Inside, a letter from the bank, addressed to both my parents, warning that the loan was overdue. The house, the one I'd saved 3 years ago, was at risk all over again. Except this time, it was my name, not theirs, on the line. In a single day, the full picture emerged. Brady had returned home, a failure from New York, and my parents, desperate to hide the truth, had gone behind my back to secure another loan. In my name, without my consent. The money was long gone, spent, I'd later learn, propping up Brady's new startup that fizzled as quickly as it launched. What burned deepest wasn't just the fraud or the looming threat to my credit and career. It was the realization that my parents had never seen me as more than a means to an end, a tool for preserving their hopes for Brady. All my years, fixing leaking pipes, painting walls, taking on the financial burden for all our sakes. None of it mattered to them when push came to shove. That night, as the house creaked in the wind and moonlight spilled onto the files spread across my bed, I didn't cry. I just felt hollow and sharp, stripped bare of the last illusions about my family. My blood ran cold, but my next steps were clear. If they wanted a war, I was finally ready for battle. The plan for payback and the dramatic move out. My mind spun for hours after uncovering the forgery, swirling between rage, heartbreak, and something sharper, determination. I refused to let my brother, or my parents for that matter, just waltz away with everything I'd poured my life and savings into. So sometime after midnight, sprawled on my comforter beneath that blue ceiling, I started drafting a plan. No more good daughter, no more quiet self-sacrifice. This time, I was leaving on my own terms, and I'd make damn sure they remembered it. Step 1. Inventory. With sharp clarity, I slipped from bed and wandered each room, clutching my notepad, cataloging every possession I'd personally paid for. The slate gray sofa I'd handpicked after finding the old one too sunken to save. The flat-screen TV that kept Mom company after Dad dozed off. The sturdy washing machine. The pale curtains that caught the morning sun. I listed lamps, end tables, area rugs, my favorite pillows, a battered but beloved coffee maker, even every spoon and cup I'd bought in discount store sprees when finances were tight. Each item was a memory, an anchor. Step 2. The movers. I knew this couldn't drag on.
I can't believe you did
The
this
less
to
warning
us.
my parents
Don't you
had,
dare walk away
the
from me
fewer
without
obstacles
talking to you.
they could throw in my way. At 8 a.m., I called Missoula's busiest moving service, Big Sky Moving. Explained I needed everything hauled out by evening, no exceptions. The woman on the phone, crisp and efficient, asked for an itemized list, then assured me her team could get to my house by 2 that afternoon. I felt my pulse steady for the first time in days. Packing was both methodical and cathartic. I started with my bedroom, stacking jeans and sweatshirts in battered old suitcases, pulling books from shelves, packing up my design portfolios, and framed certifications, those I'd earned on the heels of late nights working and dreaming under this roof. I paused at a photo on my nightstand, a smiling snapshot of the Neal family from before it all broke. I slid it into a kitchen box. Memories, maybe, but not chains. By 10 a.m., I moved to the shared living spaces, labeling my belongings with blue painter's tape. I worked fast, head down, pausing only to answer texts from Lindsay, whose encouragement came in bursts. Document everything, photos too. When Mom padded into the kitchen mid-morning, she looked at the growing stacks of boxes, forehead creasing with anxiety. "Whitney, what are you—" I didn't flinch. "Just following your deadline, Mom." She hovered, wringing a dish towel, guilt shimmering in her gaze. But she offered no apology. I turned away, focusing instead on wrapping glassware and unplugging appliances. The toaster, the blender, even the old slow cooker I'd bought for her chili recipes. By noon, the house buzzed with activity. Diane Burke, my next-door neighbor, and a fixture on our street for decades, poked her head through the front door, bearing a plate of chocolate chip cookies. "Heard you were moving out," she said, eyes kind but searching. I hesitated, then admitted, "My family decided the house wasn't mine anymore." She handed over the cookies and squeezed my shoulder. "Just know, everyone on this block sees what you've done for this place." Her words were both balm and proof. I hadn't been invisible after all. At 2 p.m. sharp, Big Sky's crew rolled up. 3 men in navy jumpsuits, quick on their feet, introduced themselves with quiet professionalism. I directed traffic, box by box, room by room, marking everything that was mine. As they shouldered the TV and sofa toward the door, Mom watched in silence from the foot of the stairs, lips pressed tightly. The process moved faster than I'd imagined. By late afternoon, the living room felt eerily hollow. No gray sofa, no sun-drenched curtains, just faded carpet and echoing footsteps. The kitchen counter had lost its coffee maker and toaster. The laundry room, now empty, except for a lone basket. With every piece that left, I felt lighter, like I was reclaiming something stolen, not losing it. My father returned home as the last boxes were loaded onto the truck. He barely spared me a glance, and instead focused on the barren spaces, registering the magnitude of what was missing. "Where do you think you're taking all that?" His voice was low, simmering, with disbelief. "Everything that belonged to me. That's the deal, right? You wanted me out. I'm gone." No one stopped me. Not my mother, not my silent father. Certainly not the brother who never showed his face. For years, they'd acted like my efforts were background noise. But today, they watched every box roll out the front door. Before I locked up, Diane reappeared. She stood in the drive, arms crossed against the Montana wind, and watched as the last item disappeared onto the truck. "You did good, Whitney. Don't let anyone tell you different." That night, tucked into a motel off the highway, surrounded by my boxed-up life, I allowed myself one deep, shuddering breath. The house on River Road could crumble or get auctioned off. I didn't care. I cared that I'd chosen myself, for by the time the sun cracked through the blinds that Friday morning, the bitter taste in my mouth had settled into something sharper. Resolve. Anger had done its job. Now it was time to act. As I lay in my half-packed childhood bedroom, the betrayal from my parents and Colt pressed against my chest like a heavy textbook. I replayed Dad's cold ultimatum over and over, but now, instead of feeling small, I felt cunning. They thought I'd just vanish and leave my soul behind. They had no clue what I was capable of. This was Missoula, not Manhattan. People around here still noticed who actually kept a roof from caving in. And I'd show them all. Step 1, make an inventory. I started scribbling every single thing I'd ever bought for this house, from the designer couch in the living room to the smallest kitchen gadget. I dug up the faded Home Depot receipts I'd stashed in a shoebox, proof of every gallon of paint, every light bulb replaced. The list grew, covering half my spiral notebook. On my laptop, I pulled up emails for all the large purchases: the washing machine, the TV, the curtains, the coffee table. Each line was a monument to the years I'd spent turning this rundown place into a real home, my home. By mid-morning, anxiety and adrenaline had fused in my veins. I paced the hall, eyeing the stacks of boxes, and the odds and ends that still needed sorting. It all felt surreal. I was inventorying my own life, prepping to extract it from the one place I should have always felt safe. The decisions came fast. The gray sofa, mine, my dad's battered hunter green recliner, his, dishes, half mine, half theirs, each glass held up to the kitchen window to look for that faint logo I'd special ordered 2 Christmases ago. I left a notepad on the dining room table, writing in all caps, Whitney's, do not touch, just in case the hint wasn't clear. Next step, find a moving company, fast, searching for Missoula movers who don't ask questions. I landed on a local outfit, Big Sky Relocation, a ragtag crew of college kids with strong arms and no judgment. I booked them for that afternoon, barely hiding the tremor in my voice as I spelled out the address and time. How much stuff are we talking? The foreman, Chase, asked. A houseful, but only what's mine, and I mean that literally. He chuckled on the phone, but I wasn't joking. With logistics in motion, a rogue sense of freedom crept in. My parents were at the grocery store. Typical, as if preparing for company instead of a mutiny. I seized the day and started stripping the house, emotionally at first, then literally. Off came the curtains I'd hung myself last spring, the bright pop of color retreating from sunlit windows. Every trip to my car with a box felt less like defeat and more like taking pieces of myself back. Each haul built a momentum, a rhythm to my retaliation. And all the while, the eyes of Missoula watched. Diane Burke, our neighbor and part-time town crier, spotted me hauling my flat screen out the front door. She called over from her porch, eyebrows raised. Everything okay, Whitney? Just moving what's mine, I answered, mustering all the calm I could. She nodded, the kind of nod that said she was on my side. It gave me an odd comfort, knowing the people who'd watched me paint this porch, fix this fence, and mow this yard year after year actually noticed who kept the gears running. As I loaded up another box, Henry King drove by, giving a horn toot and a thumbs up. In a town like this, loyalty wasn't cheap, but when you earned it, it was a force. By early afternoon, the moving truck pulled into the driveway, rumbling and oversized for our suburban cul-de-sac. Chase and his crew filed out, looking at the mountain of labeled boxes on the lawn. You weren't kidding about the house full, he whistled. You want us to start in the living room. Every box with my name on it. Don't touch the rest. As they worked, I supervised tightly, making sure not a single dish or picture frame that belonged to me went astray. When the last of my boxes cleared the bedroom, I took a long look around at the pale blue walls I'd picked out during a bleak spring, the sturdy nightstand I'd found at Goodwill and refinished with old-school sandpaper. This house still held echoes of my laughter and exhaustion, but with every armload I claimed, it grew quieter, more hollow, but also more truthful. Around 3 p.m., the front door banged open. My parents returned, their faces falling as soon as they saw the emptied spaces and the line of boxes snaking down the hall. My mother's jaw worked silently. My father pursed his lips, arms crossed, thunderclouds gathering over his brow. Dad opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand. I'm only taking what's mine, and I have the receipts to prove it, I said, voice steady. This isn't about revenge, it's about fairness. If Colt wants the house, he can have the house. He just won't get a single thing I worked and paid for. For a while, they just stood in the entryway, stunned into silence by the small tornado tearing through their world. To my surprise, neither yelled. Mom just shuffled past me to the kitchen, catching sight of the bare windows, and let out a soft gasp. She looked smaller than I remembered. a woman at the mercy of choices she refused to own. Dad grumbled about respect and loyalty, but the fight had drained out of both of them. Meanwhile, the movers swept in and out, professional and speedy. The sun hung low when they finally slammed shut the rear of the truck, the echo ringing through the cul-de-sac. They offered a half-hearted "good luck" as they climbed in, but I barely heard them over the roar inside my head. Every mile that carried my belongings away from that house was a mile closer to my own freedom, and I let myself savor it. By the time dusk painted the sky in faded lilac, everything I owned was packed tight in the moving truck, idling outside. I glanced around at the rooms stripped bare, my footsteps echoing louder than ever. It could have felt like loss, but all I sensed was clarity. These empty walls were finally honest. They belonged to the people who had chosen them over their child. Before locking up, I walked through each room, sticky notes where furniture had once stood. "Not yours. Bought by Whitney. Do not remove." In the kitchen, I left one final sticky on the fridge. It simply read, "I took back what's mine, just like you asked me to leave," stepping onto the porch for what I knew would be the last time. I found Diane waiting at the bottom of the steps. She handed me a small envelope, her way of wishing luck, filled with a couple 20s and a note in her neat cursive. "You're stronger than you think. The block's rooting for you." I blinked away unexpected tears and hugged her. The first moment all day I'd allowed myself to feel vulnerable. Diane whispered, "Don't let them take your kindness too. Keep that. It's rarer than you know." With one last glance up at the windows I'd washed every spring, I slid into the truck cab and nodded to Chase. Time to roll. We rumbled down the street, headlights slicing through the first blue of evening. As we cleared the driveway, I felt as though I'd finally started rewriting my history. On my terms this time. The house, for all its memories and wounds, shrank in the rearview mirror. In its place grew an idea of self-respect I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just a caretaker anymore, or an afterthought in my own story. I was a woman reclaiming everything she had built, refusing to be erased. That night, surrounded by boxes in my temporary studio apartment, exhaustion finally hit. But along with it came something else, an undercurrent of pride. I looked at my belongings, the threads tying my past and future together, and felt a new kind of peace. The payback wasn't just about taking my things. It was about finally standing up for myself, even if that meant starting over in a place that belonged to me alone. And I realized, in Missoula or anywhere, sometimes reclaiming your life is the bravest thing you can do when your world is upended by the very people you thought would always have your back. Facing family, truth blooming amidst ruins. The moment I dreaded, and in some furious way needed, finally arrived on a moody Saturday afternoon. The threatened rain, but delivered only wind. I just finished stacking the last of my labeled boxes in the moving truck when the front door flung open. Colt, my brother, burst in, trailing cold air and entitlement. "Seriously, Whitney," he snapped, eyes scanning the gutted living room as if he were surveying a crime scene. "You took everything." I stood by the window, hands buried in my jacket pockets, holding my ground. There was no warning, no awkward pleasantries. He got straight into it, voice quivering with anger and disbelief. He looked less like the Wall Street golden boy my parents always bragged about, and more like a man who had watched all his cards tumble in a losing hand. Gone was the tailored suit from New York. He was in jeans and an old fleece, his confidence worn thin. "You're everything, Colt, or mine?" I answered calmly, though my heart was thumping so loud I could barely hear him. I pointed around the empty space. Every single piece I took was something I bought, built, or sacrificed for. Did you really think you'd just walk in and inherit what you never cared for? Colt laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. But there was desperation in it. You're being petty, Whitney. Dad and Mom said the house is mine. I thought you were grown up enough not to make this a scene. A memory flitted across my mind. Colt's absence through every family crisis. His phone calls at holidays, promising to visit, always too busy to come home. It's not a scene, I replied. It's the truth catching up. You never showed up. Not when the pipes burst, not when Dad lost his job, not when Mom cried herself to sleep over the bills, not when the bank almost took this house. He opened his mouth to argue, then caught sight of the loan documents peeking out from my folder. The confrontation sharpened. I pulled them out, my ace now. This is what you, Mom and Dad did, I said, brandishing the proof. Used my identity, forged my signature, took out 60 grand so you could have another chance. The house, the loan, all of it. You gambled my future so you could save face. For a split second, Colt's bravado cracked. He looked away, jaw clenched. Don't turn this on me. Dad said a lot of things. I cut him off. None of them let you commit fraud. Behind him, our father's heavy footsteps thundered down the stairs. He stopped in the hallway, arms folded, face like stone. Mom hovered at the edge of the kitchen, wringing her hands. The three of them formed a wall, but after everything, I no longer felt small. Dad tried for stern authority. Whitney, we did what we had to do for this family. Your brother needs stability. Stability. The word rang hollow. My laugh was bitter. And I don't? I was your stability for years, and you threw me out without a second thought. Mom finally spoke, voice wavering. Sweetheart, it wasn't meant to hurt you. Colt needed help, and I didn't. My words came out before I could stop them. Did you even ask what it cost me to save this house? To save all of us? The room was locked in silence. Outside, wind rattled a loose shutter like a warning. All the years of swallowing my pain, masking disappointment with smiles, burned away. I turned to Colt, who now visibly shrank. I did what none of you would, I said, forcing them all to see me as I truly was. The good daughter, right? Disposable once the prodigal son wants his throne back. Colt's pride flickered. Okay, maybe we can work out a deal, he stammered. That New York negotiation reflex kicking in too late. Too late for making deals, I replied, cold but determined. I've filed the lawsuit. Identity theft, wire fraud, emotional damages. I have everything documented. Lindsay's handling it. And next week, you'll all get to explain yourselves to a judge. Not just to me. Dad scowled. But there was panic behind the bluster. We're your parents, Whitney. This is family. You want to take us to court? My voice was firm, but quieter now. Family didn't protect me. Family forced me out. Another beat of silence. Then, from the open door, our neighbor Henry King appeared. He stood there, arms crossed, calm but intimidating, his presence grounding me. You folks should be ashamed, Henry said. Everyone on this street knows who held that house together. And it wasn't Colt. Colt scoffed. Stay out of it. But Henry wouldn't budge. I saw Whitney scraping those railings last March in a blizzard. Saw her fixing your porch, mowing this yard, making sure you never lost the house while you bragged about your son's Wall Street glory. You want the community's respect. You better start earning it. For the first time, I saw my parents hesitate. Not because of a legal threat, but because someone else had called out the truth. Mom's lip trembled. Dad's pride curled into something defeated. Henry's right, I said, my voice breaking a little, all the years of neglect suddenly crashing down. You didn't just use me, you erased me. But I see myself now, even if you refuse to. The wind picked up outside, and with it, something inside me finally let go. The fear, the need to be chosen. I glanced one last time at each of them. Colt sullen, Mom close to tears, Dad no longer angry, but empty. They'd made their choices. Now they'd face the consequences. You know what hurts worst? I said, quietly. You made me fight like hell to prove I belong. Nobody answered. Colt grabbed his bag and shoved past me, muttering about lawyers. Dad watched me steadily, but there was nothing left to say. Mom reached out as if to apologize, but I gently sidestepped her. I picked up my documents, squared my shoulders, turned to Henry in the doorway. Let's go, neighbor, I said. He nodded, offering a quiet clap on my back. As I stepped out, I felt the full ache and relief of truth finally voiced. My family stood in pieces behind me. Failure, regret, shame, and for once, it wasn't my job to fix it. The long hidden cracks in our foundation were now exposed for the world to see. I didn't look back. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk out of the ruins holding your head high, letting the truth bloom behind you, even if it hurts. Legal battle, fighting for justice, and the courage to stand alone. The days after walking out of my childhood home blurred into a tight knot of anxiety, paperwork, and a grim determination I'd never known I possessed. If that Thursday night dinner had splintered my illusion of family, the agonizing week that followed set my resolve in stone. I would not let them erase or ruin what was left of me. The fight would be messy and public, sure, but it would be honest, and for once, entirely on my terms. Lindsay, true to her word and her iron-spined reputation, dove into the legal trenches right alongside me. Her law office, a converted historic home off Pine Street, became our war room. There we sat, night after night, ringed by half-drunk cups of tea and piles of folders, spreadsheets, and evidence photos. The sound of the scanner was our metronome, a beat underlining emails, receipts, and every piece of paper that proved the money trail for the $60,000 loan, my forged signature, and all the assets that had been siphoned off in my name. I know it's overwhelming, Lindsay would say, her eyes never leaving the screen as she drafted the complaint. But you have leverage, Whitney. You have facts, proof, and, most importantly, courage. They can't talk their way out of this. Still, the thought of going up against my own family in court was enough to steal my sleep. I'd always been the peacemaker, the one who fixed things, not the one who dragged secrets into the light. But it became clear as the days crawled on, Colt, Dad, and even Mom had chosen to cross a line. My trust had been violated so thoroughly that I couldn't look in the mirror without seeing that betrayal written across my skin. Every phone call from my parents, or more accurately, every missed call, I couldn't bring myself to answer, only stiffened my resolve. The apologies, when they came, were fumbled and thin. You know your brother needed us. We did what was best for everyone. I gathered character statements from neighbors, Diane Burke, Henry King, and even the usually reserved Mrs. Gillespie from next door, who'd seen me repairing the porch and heard the late-night arguments. Their words painted a fuller picture. Whitney as the dependable daughter, the caretaker, the unpaid repairwoman and guardian of the home. Each statement was a balm and a sword at once. Filing the lawsuit against my family was agonizing. The clerk at the Missoula County Courthouse gave me a sympathetic nod as I slid the folder across the counter. Her silence was gentler than any words could be. In the complaint, Lindsay laid everything bare: identity theft, wire fraud, misappropriation of funds, and emotional distress. There was no turning back once the summons was served. My childhood address was now at the heart of a case number. My family's name appeared not in a holiday card list, but in the index of district court dockets. The legal process lurched forward. Initial hearings took place in a cramped courtroom with high windows that filtered in the weak Montana sunlight. My parents looked small, sitting beside Colt, who avoided my gaze as if I were a ghost. Dad's jaw was locked in that familiar stubborn set, while Mom wrung her hands in her lap, eyes red-rimmed but unrepentant. Colt tried to play the part of the misunderstood son, but even the judge's eyebrows rose at the mention of his startup and the convenience of the forged loan. There were depositions, Lindsay's cross-examinations, polite but unflinching, left my family floundering. Bank officers testified about the loan process, explaining how the Whitney Neal, who'd supposedly signed off, was never actually present. Finn Walsh, my former client and the branch manager, confirmed his gut feeling about the oddness of my signature. The paper trail matched my recollections to a T. My evidence painted in cold clarity what I'd tried for so long to ignore. My family had seen my stability as an asset to be leveraged, not a person to be cherished. Support from the community, neighbors, old friends, even former clients, never faltered. I received notes and texts almost daily. Stay strong. We're rooting for you. Don't let them rewrite the truth. Every piece of encouragement was a lifeline when my courage sputtered beneath the humiliation. The trial itself felt surreal. Lindsay's opening statement pulled no punches. This is a case about trust, about the devastation wrought when those closest to us take advantage of that trust for their own benefit. Ms. Neal did not simply lose money. She lost her sense of belonging, her sense of safety. The law exists to protect people like Whitney, even, and especially, when the threat comes from those within the home. My own testimony was harrowing. I told the judge about the sacrifices I'd made, the years of freelance gigs and missed opportunities, the weekends fixing the structure of my family, both literally and figuratively, the deflation I'd felt the night of Dad's ultimatum, the shock of discovering the fraudulent loan, the devastation of packing up a life's worth of investment and love. Colt's defense wobbled under scrutiny. He spun a story about family desperation, about doing what it took to keep everyone afloat. Dad's statements veered between pride and regret, but he never apologized. Mom confessed to signing, voice trembling, but insisted she'd only meant to help. It was both better and worse than I'd feared. So much love, so much cowardice. But in the light of day, with the facts stacked up, what my family had done was inexcusable. Verdict day came on a late spring morning. The courtroom was almost empty. Just a few friends, the lawyers, and my family, sitting in a fragmented cluster. When the judge ruled in my favor, voiding the fraudulent loan, ordering my name cleared, and assessing damages against my parents and Colt, a wave of relief and heartbreak crashed over me. The house would go to auction to cover still outstanding debt, but my future was finally, legally, my own again. As I stepped out of the courthouse into the sharp Montana sunlight, a different weight settled onto my shoulders. For all the catharsis and validation, there was a part of me that ached. Grief for the relationships that had changed irreparably. My phone buzzed with messages of support, and Lindsay squeezed my hand. "You did what you needed to do, Whit," she said softly. "They made their bed. You just refused to lie in it. It's hard to explain the odd mixture of emptiness and freedom that followed the verdict. My parents' silence was complete, broken only by the legal requirement to communicate through their counsel. Colt slinked back to his own life, living, I heard, jobless and aimless in Missoula, while the town gossip quietly condemned his role in our family downfall. Our old house awaited auction, its windows dark, porch railings loose, and the garden slowly overrun by weeds. There would be no home to return to, not for anyone. And yet, for the first time in years, I had the clarity to build a life that was only mine. It wasn't about winning or even payback by then. It was about dignity, about proving to myself that my worth didn't depend on unseen labor, on forgiveness for the unforgivable, or on my ability to absorb betrayal without flinching. There were days I cried for the people I'd lost, and days I raged at the injustice that forced a daughter to take such a lonely stance. But there were also mornings, a few at first, and then more and more, when I woke up unafraid, ready to start over, proud of the woman who had chosen her own voice over being silenced forever. In the end, the courthouse was not the finish line, but the threshold. Justice had been served, true enough, but real courage, I realized, isn't found on a witness stand. It's in the quiet, resolved moments when you decide that your boundaries are no longer negotiable, even if that means walking away from the people you once called home. A new beginning, learning to live for myself. When the dust settled and the court order became official, I spent a full week simply catching my breath. My new apartment was nothing like the old house on River Road. It was small, perched above a coffee shop downtown, with water-stained ceilings and a rickety fire escape outside the kitchen window. Yet the place was mine, in a way the house had never really been. Every scuff on the hardwood, every thrifted chair, every bill in my own name. The walls didn't echo with arguments or judgments. For the first time in my adult life, I could feel the edges of my freedom. The first morning, sunlight streamed through hand-me-down sheer curtains, casting speckled gold across the unpacked boxes. I lay in bed longer than usual, listening to the city's pulse, a delivery truck rumbling by, the hiss of a distant espresso machine, voices rising in the alley below. It was all unfamiliar, but there was a certain hope in the strangeness. I rolled out of bed, brewed myself coffee in the battered percolator I'd fought to reclaim, and stood barefoot at the window, surveying my new kingdom. The Clark Fork River wound its way through town, sparkling in the late spring sun. A reminder, maybe, that change could be beautiful too. Those first weeks were painfully lonely at times, without the constant press of duty, laundry for my parents, emails corralling my brother's plans, birthday reminders, dinner arguments. I found I didn't quite know what to do with all my hours. At first, I kept glancing at my phone, expecting a text from my mom asking about groceries, or a call from my father to fix the Wi-Fi. The silence was vast and awkward, and it ached sometimes, deep in my chest. But in the gentle hush, I also began to find possibilities, my taste in music, my peculiar love for midnight grilled cheese, the way I'd never minded folding laundry if it only belonged to me. I poured myself into work at a new design firm in downtown Missoula. For years, my creativity had been used chiefly to patch, paint, and reimagine a home for others. Here, though, my ideas were finally valued on their own terms. My colleagues noticed. The owner, Marcia, complimented my mood boards and asked me to pitch for a boutique hotel concept just 3 weeks in. There was a thrill in feeling seen, really seen, not just as the responsible daughter or the invisible caretaker, but as a designer in her own right, carving out a career on the strength of her own name. The community in Missoula, which had quietly backed me through the legal storm, became a surprising source of gentle comfort. Diane Burke stopped by the new place with a houseplant and a pair of oven mitts she'd sewn herself. Henry King knocked once to drill a coat rack into my crumbly wall, a silent gesture that told me I hadn't lost everyone worth calling family. Even the barista downstairs learned my order by heart before the week was out. These moments, small but dazzling, were proof that chosen family could sometimes fill the gaps that blood had left hollow. On weekends, I wandered the riverbank in sneakers, sketchbook in hand, learning to appreciate the sweep of blue sky and the snowmelt chill, even when biting memories threatened to drag me down. My old life tugged at me for a while. A snapshot of my parents' house, shuttered and empty. My brother's shadow, long and sharp on the sidewalk. But I let the ache come, and then I let it go. What I couldn't forgive, I left behind on the trail, tucked beneath the stones, in the cottonwood roots beside the Clark Fork. Each day, I tested a new boundary. I bought groceries just for myself, stocked the fridge with Greek yogurt and cherries. No one would steal in the night. I fell asleep with the TV on, if I wanted to, or read until dawn, with my phone set to silent, without apology or fear. I turned down invitations when I was too tired and accepted others simply because the idea of laughter in crowded bars no longer frightened me. There was freedom in understanding that I was responsible only for my own happiness. I started therapy, awkward at first, but soon a bracing relief. My therapist, Lorraine, helped me untangle guilt from responsibility, loneliness from loss. We talked through the anger, the feelings of betrayal, and eventually the quiet pride in having survived it all. She reminded me that drawing boundaries was an act of self-respect, not punishment. She also taught me that choosing my own life didn't mean I hated my family. It meant I finally valued myself enough to stop shrinking just to keep the peace. There were setbacks. Some nights, shame and rage ricocheted in my dreams. I'd wake sweating, hands knotted in my sheets, reliving that fateful dinner or the judge's sentence. On rare occasions, I'd spot my mother at the farmer's market, her shoulders hunched, or receive a one-line text from my dad. Hope you're well. Every time, I had to remind myself I owed them neither anger nor forgiveness. Growth wasn't measured by who apologized first, but by learning who I was when no one was looking. Slowly, my apartment began to feel alive with my own spirit. I painted an accent wall a defiant blue, hung clashing art from thrift stores, and let stacks of design magazines take over the coffee table. Friends visited, old and new, and filled the space with stories and laughter. The housewarming was small, but joyful, complete with too many desserts and Marcia making a toast.